What happens when the camera stops rolling but the emotions refuse to cut? What do you do when the line between acting and reality becomes so blurred that even the cast can't tell where the scene ends and real life begins? On the set of one of Nollywood's most anticipated blockbusters, 3 stars found themselves trapped in a whirlwind of passion, jealousy, and professionalism that nearly tore the entire production apart. Maurice, Sonia, Uche, and Brian Okwara walked onto that set as professionals, but what unfolded was a masterclass in human emotion that no script could have predicted. Buckle up, because this behind-the-scenes drama is juicier than any scene that made it to the screen. The stage was set for greatness. Sonia Uche, Nollywood's reigning princess, had been cast as the female lead in what was being whispered about as the movie of the year. Maurice and Brian Okwara, 2 of the industry's most charismatic leading men, were set to battle for her affection on screen. The script promised romance, the budget promised spectacle, and the chemistry promised fire. But nobody, absolutely nobody, anticipated that the real drama would happen when the director yelled action. During what was supposed to be a routine romantic scene between Sonia and Brian, something shifted. Brian, known for his method acting and spontaneous brilliance, decided to improvise. He went beyond the scripted kiss, beyond the written dialogue, adding touches and whispers that weren't in the screenplay. The crew held their breath. The camera kept rolling. And Maurice, watching from the sidelines, felt his blood pressure skyrocket. What Brian saw as artistic freedom, Maurice interpreted as a complete violation of boundaries, and honey, the tension in that room could have powered an entire city block. Maurice didn't wait for the scene to end. He didn't pull the director aside for a quiet word. No, this man marched straight onto that set, still in his costume, still mic'd up, and confronted Brian face to face while cast and crew watched in absolute shock. The words exchanged were hot enough to melt the studio lights. Maurice accused Brian of crossing lines, of using the craft as an excuse to get too comfortable with Sonia. Brian, caught off guard but not backing down, defended his choices as pure artistry, insisting that great acting requires risk and that Maurice's reaction was proof of personal insecurity, not professional concern. The production ground to a halt. Camera operators pretended to check equipment. Makeup artists suddenly became very interested in their brushes. The director stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let them sort it out. Meanwhile, Sonia stood between 2 grown men arguing over her like she was the last jollof rice at a party, and let me tell you, she was not impressed with either of them at that moment. The fallout was immediate and messy. The crew split faster than a poorly written script. Some team members sided with Maurice, calling him protective and loving, arguing that any man worth his salt would have reacted the same way seeing another man take liberties with his woman, even in the name of acting. Others rolled their eyes so hard they probably saw their own brains, labeling Maurice as jealous, insecure, and unprofessional for bringing personal feelings onto a professional set. A few brave souls tried to stay neutral, but in the pressure cooker environment of a film set, neutrality is about as welcome as a power outage during the final scene. The whispers started immediately. During lunch breaks, crew members huddled in corners dissecting every gesture, every glance, every interaction between the 3 leads. The hairstylist swore she saw Maurice giving Brian death stares between takes. The sound guy claimed he caught audio of Maurice muttering under his breath whenever Brian's name was mentioned. Production assistants started placing bets on whether they'd make it through filming without someone walking off set. The movie that was supposed to be about love and passion had become a reality show that nobody signed up for but everyone was watching. Enter Sonia Uche, the woman at the center of this storm, who proved why she's more than just a pretty face with acting chops. While Maurice fumed and Brian sulked, Sonia did what any sensible person would do when 2 men are about to turn a professional set into a WWE wrestling ring over her. She called a meeting, sat both of them down like the children they were acting like, and laid down the law with the grace of a diplomat and the firmness of a headmistress. She reminded Maurice that while his concern was noted, they were professionals first, and personal feelings couldn't dictate how scenes were performed. She told Brian that while artistic freedom was important, respect and communication were paramount, and that improvising intimate scenes without proper discussion crossed a line that no amount of method acting could justify. She emphasized that they were all there to create magic, not drama, and that if they couldn't separate their egos from their work, they'd all go home with a failed project and bruised reputations. The room fell silent. Both men, chastised but not quite ready to admit it, nodded in agreement. It was the kind of moment that would have made a perfect scene in the movie itself, except it was painfully, awkwardly real. The director, caught in the crossfire of this romantic professional collision, made a choice that added fuel to an already raging fire. He publicly supported Brian's improvisation, declaring in a production meeting that the spontaneous additions brought authenticity and raw emotion to the scene that the script alone couldn't capture. He praised Brian's commitment to the craft, calling the controversial moment one of the best pieces of acting he'd captured in his career. Maurice heard this and felt like he'd been slapped across the face with a wet script. Not only was his concern dismissed, but Brian was being celebrated for the very behavior that had triggered the confrontation in the first place. The director's stance wasn't necessarily wrong from a purely artistic perspective. Improvisation has given us some of cinema's most memorable moments, but the timing and delivery showed about as much emotional intelligence as a boom mic. Maurice sat through that meeting with a smile so tight it could have cracked diamonds, nodding politely while internally screaming. The crew noticed, because how could they not? The man looked like he was digesting broken glass while being forced to say it tasted delicious. Despite Sonia's intervention and the director's ruling, Maurice couldn't quite let it go. He showed up to every subsequent scene involving Sonia and Brian like a hawk watching field mice. Between takes, he'd appear on set even when his character wasn't in the scene, arms crossed, face unreadable, eyes tracking every movement. The crew started joking that Maurice had a sixth sense for whenever Brian and Sonia were filming together, mysteriously materializing from hair and makeup or his trailer the moment the director called for them. Some found it endearing in an overprotective boyfriend kind of way. Others found it exhausting and unprofessional, arguing that it created an atmosphere of tension that affected everyone's performance. One crew member joked that they should just add Maurice's lacking presence to the script and call it method observation. Another quipped that Maurice was giving off serious, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed," parent energy. The jokes were funny, but they also highlighted a truth nobody wanted to say out loud. This wasn't just about one improvised scene anymore. This had become about territory, trust, and three people trying to navigate a situation that was far more complicated than any screenplay could capture. Brian, for his part, played it cool on the surface, acting like the confrontation and subsequent tension rolled off him like water off a duck's back. But anyone paying attention could see the cracks. His improvisation dialed way down in subsequent scenes. The spontaneous touches disappeared. The risky dialogue choices became safer, more predictable. He still delivered powerful performances. His chemistry with Sonia was undeniable and electric, but there was a carefulness now that hadn't been there before. Some saw it as professionalism and respect for boundaries. Others saw it as a talented actor being stifled by jealousy and drama. Brian never publicly complained, never threw shade in interviews or on social media, but the energy shift was palpable. He and Maurice barely spoke off camera, their interactions limited to what was absolutely necessary for the scenes they shared. When they did have to work together, it was polite, professional, and cold enough to freeze the Sahara. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when those very scenes, charged with real underlying tension, came across as incredibly authentic on camera. Sometimes the best acting isn't acting at all. Sonia became the unofficial therapist, diplomat, and peacekeeping force of the entire production. On days when Maurice seemed particularly tense, she'd pull him aside for private conversations, reassuring him without compromising her professional standards. When Brian seemed withdrawn or overly cautious in his performance, she'd encourage him, reminding him that his talent was valued and that finding the balance between boldness and respect was possible. She somehow managed to maintain strong working relationships with both men while refusing to play into the dynamic they'd created. Cast members watched in awe as she navigated this minefield with heels on, looking flawless while doing it. The crew started calling her the ambassador, behind her back, a title that carried both respect and a touch of humor. She'd laugh it off when she heard it, but everyone knew the truth. Without Sonia's emotional intelligence and maturity, that production would have imploded faster than a poorly structured plot twist. She was the glue holding together a project that personal drama threatened to tear apart, and she did it while still delivering a performance that would undoubtedly be talked about for years. The pressure cooker environment couldn't be contained forever, and naturally, it started leaking to the outside world. Fans who followed the cast on social media began noticing things. Photos from set showed Sonia and Brian looking incredibly close, their chemistry obvious even in behind-the-scenes shots. Maurice appeared in fewer of these group photos, and when he did, eagle-eyed fans noticed his body language seemed tense. The speculation started innocently enough, just fans excited about the on-screen romance, but it quickly spiraled into full-blown theories about real-life relationships, secret romances, and love triangles. Some insiders, whether actual crew members or just people claiming to be, started dropping hints in blog comments and T-pages. One particularly juicy rumor claimed that Maurice had almost walked off set entirely after an especially intense scene between Sonia and Brian, stopped only by Sonia's intervention and the threat of breach of contract. Another whisper suggested that Brian and Sonia had been spotted having dinner together, though whether it was business or pleasure remained unclear. The online debates became as heated as the on-set confrontations, with fans taking sides, creating teams, and arguing in comment sections like their lives depended on it. The question that emerged from all this chaos became a debate that extended far beyond the set and into broader conversations about relationships, boundaries, and professionalism. Was Maurice being protective and loving, the kind of man who stands up for his woman even in uncomfortable situations? Or was he being jealous and controlling, unable to separate professional acting from personal territory? Was Brian careless and disrespectful, hiding behind artistic freedom to cross lines he shouldn't have? Or was he simply dedicated to his craft, willing to take risks that lesser actors wouldn't dare attempt? And what about Sonia? Should she feel protected by Maurice's intervention, or restricted by his inability to trust her professional judgment? These weren't just questions about three actors on a movie set. They became reflections on modern relationships, on the balance between love and trust, between protection and control. Some argued passionately that Maurice showed the kind of devotion every woman deserves, a man willing to stand up and set boundaries regardless of consequences. Others countered just as passionately that real love requires trust, and that Maurice's actions suggested he either didn't trust Sonia to handle herself or didn't trust her motives. The conversation revealed something profound. We are all trying to figure out where healthy concern ends and unhealthy control begins, and there's no easy answer. Here's the beautiful irony that nobody saw coming. That controversial improvised scene, the one that started the whole mess, that almost derailed the production and created weeks of tension. It ended up being one of the most powerful moments in the entire film. When the movie finally wrapped and the editing began, that scene stood out as raw, authentic, and emotionally devastating in the best possible way. The director's instinct had been right, Brian's risk had paid off artistically, even if it had cost them all personally. The chemistry between Sonia and Brian translated to screen in a way that scripted moments rarely do. Maurice's protective instincts, while disruptive to the piece on set, came from a place of genuine emotion that, ironically, probably helped him deliver some of his most intense and authentic performances as well. The film that audiences will eventually see will showcase magic, passion, romance, and drama so real it will make people's hearts race. But they'll never know about the actual storm behind those perfect takes. They'll never know that the tension in certain scenes wasn't just good acting but real emotion barely contained by professionalism. They'll never know that the movie they are falling in love with was born from chaos, conflict, and three people learning painful lessons about trust, boundaries, and the complicated space where personal and professional lives collide. So here's where we land, family. Maurice represented love, fierce and protective, sometimes bordering on possessive but ultimately coming from a place of caring. Brian represented craft, dedicated and bold, sometimes crossing lines but ultimately committed to creating something extraordinary. Sonia represented wisdom, the mature, level-headed force that kept everything from completely falling apart. Together, they didn't just make a movie. They gave us a real-life masterclass in human relationships, in the messy, complicated, beautiful struggle of balancing emotions, work, boundaries, and ego. This story isn't just tea to sip and gossip about. It's a mirror reflecting questions we all face in our own relationships and careers. Now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, don't be shy. Should Sonia feel protected by Maurice's actions or restricted by them? Was Maurice right to confront Brian, or did he let jealousy cloud his professionalism? Should Brian keep taking creative risks even when they make people uncomfortable, or should he play it safer to respect boundaries? And most importantly, what would you have done if you were in any of their shoes? Hit that like button if this story had you hooked, subscribe because you know there's always more where this came from, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going, because something tells me we haven't had the last of this love triangle. The movie is coming soon, and trust me, after everything you've just learned, you'll be watching those scenes with completely different eyes.